Questions continue to linger around a big undercover federal drug and gun sting here in Albuquerque. Now, that sting was carried out last year by the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, but controversy over how it was conducted started swirling several months back, in large part due to the reporting of NMIF correspondent Jeff Proctor, both here on New Mexico in Focus and online with New Mexico in Depth. Jeff is here with me in studio now, and Jeff, this week we'll hear for the first time from a federal official about the accusations you're reporting as uncovered. But before we get into that, let's back up a quick step and talk about, remind our viewers, what were the objections to this sting? What happened here?
Well, primarily the objections have been on sort of two grounds. One is that there was a huge amount of racial profiling that went on with this operation. They arrested 103 people over in the International District, the southeast part of Albuquerque. 28 of the people they arrested were black. That is a hugely disproportionate number of people arrested in a city with a 3% black population. So we've seen legal challenges based on what's called selective enforcement. Essentially that they were out to find black people to arrest in the operation. The other legal challenge that we've seen is on entrapment grounds, that they used these confidential informants, the ATF did, to go target people for arrest. And essentially offered them opportunities to commit crimes that they otherwise would not have committed.
Interesting. After months of silence from the feds, you were able to get an interview with Damon Martinez, who was then the U.S. attorney for us, of course. With Jeff Sessions coming in, he was moved out of that position. But we'll hear from him in a minute, but I'm just curious, why has it been so hard getting someone on the record about this case? What was the stumbling block here?
I can't say specifically. I know that what I've been told repeatedly in the course of reporting this story out over the past 5 months is that it is the Justice Department's policy not to comment on things that are still pending before the court. So I've sent, a dozen requests to the ATF for an interview, and probably at least that many to the U.S. Attorney's Office to try to get somebody to speak on the record. And then, of course, found my way to Mr. Martinez, who's not in the office anymore and is in fact running for Congress now. So I negotiated and sort of back and forth with him for a couple of months to get this interview.
We're going to hear from him in just a second, but for understandable reasons, I guess he couldn't give you a whole lot of details. Why was that?
I'm not sure how understandable the reasons are, actually. What he did was he cited a number of what he called government privileges and the rules of professional conduct. I'm not a lawyer, but based on my sort of research about those privileges, he's taking a pretty expansive reading of those to avoid answering even really basic questions about the operation.
Interesting. Let's listen now to part of your interview with Mr. Martinez. You can watch the full interview online at newmexicoinfocus.org. But up first, Jeff will ask him if he still thinks the sting was a success, even after all the objections and concerns raised by the community.
If I can put this into context, the investigation that you're talking about, when the investigation started, what we knew at that time was that in the mid-1990s with APD, they had about 948 officers. And right now they have about 850, which is a decrease of about 100 officers. Now, over that same time period, Albuquerque increased in population by about 150,000 people.
Okay.
So if the police department had increased the way the population increased, it should have been about 1,240 officers. We know that they're way below that they're overworked and underpaid. So at the conclusion of this investigation that you're talking about, what we knew several things. One, that the investigation had taken off about 17 pounds of meth. It had taken about 2.5 pounds of heroin had been seized, about 1.5 pounds of cocaine had been seized, and about 127 firearms had been seized, including assault weapons, and then obviously a number of defendants.
So the purpose of the operation was to make up for 100 lost officers? Is that how this came to be?
No, and let me make my point here, and I'm sorry, I guess I didn't do that, was that Albuquerque's in the middle of a crime wave. And the APD obviously didn't have the amount of officers it needed to counteract this crime wave. And so to the extent that the federal authorities could become part of fighting this crime wave, That was part of the point behind this investigation.
Did ATF know at the time that that was the purpose of the operation?
Well, now this is where I have to be careful because I'm still under certain, my code of ethics, being the U.S. attorney during that time period, is I can't give you certain answers concerning the deliberative process that took part as the investigation took place.
Why can't you give me any details or specifics about the way the operation came to be or the way it unfolded? If you could just explain what your reason is for not being able to answer certain questions. It seems like we may find our way into that territory a fair bit here.
Well, and like I said, to the extent that I can answer your questions, I want to answer them. But
Okay.
I wrote down, there's 5 areas that I have to be careful in being an officer of the court, having been U.S. attorney during this process. It's a deliberative process, the attorney-client privilege, government ethics regs, non-public information that we discussed at that point, and then the rules of professional conduct, and I can give you a side on that if you want. But here's the point, and this is the analogy that I would make, is you being a reporter, when you have a source and you talk to that source, even though that story may be over with, you still protect the information from the confidentiality of that source. Well, in my case, the deliberative process that occurred, I still need to protect that.
In my case, as a journalist, when it comes to protecting a source, I'm doing that in the public interest, to provide information to the public. I want to ask where some of these privileges are concerned that you're citing to maybe not be able to answer specific questions. Are those privileges that you could waive?
I don't believe that I can waive them. I think it would need to be the Department of Justice itself.
Did you ask in advance of our interview to waive some of those privileges? You knew you were coming down to talk to me today about the operation. Obviously, this was something you were thinking about, having some of these privileges in place. Did you ask in advance of the interview to waive some of those?
No, I did not.
Is that something that you could do after we get finished with the interview today? Could you go back and ask to have some of those privileges waived so that maybe we can get to some of these specific questions that I have?
Well, at this point, my answer is there's certain things I can't talk about.
Okay, so is that a no? That's not something you can commit to doing, asking to have the privileges waived?
Well, here's where I'm not going to overpromise is under the code of conduct and the ethics regs, I don't know exactly what it would take for me to be able to say certain information, so I don't want to overpromise you right now.
Is that something you could research, though? You'd be willing to research after our interview today?
Well, I'll look into it.
Okay, very good. Let's give it a shot. Let's try and get some of these questions answered. Going back originally to my original question, do you still believe that the operation was a success? And if so, how do you define success for a law enforcement operation like this?
Well, I told you the amount of drugs and guns that were taken off the street. Also, there were individuals who, and this again is where I have to be careful. Mm-hmm. I only want to talk about certain cases that I know of where the process has already gone through, where the individuals have pled guilty and been sentenced. And to my understanding, there are individuals who have received some sentences, significant sentences, and they are no longer on the street in a position where they could hurt somebody.
So is that a yes? You consider the operation a success? I'm trying to get a yes or no from you here.
And what I told you is there's guns and drugs that have been taken off the street, and there's individuals who are no longer on the street, and they're no longer a danger to the community.
In each of these cases, though, and in almost every single one of the cases, my own reporting has shown that those were relatively small amounts by federal standards and by the standards of the office that you used to lead. If you take it in totality, those numbers you just cited, the 15 pounds of methamphetamine spread out over 103 defendants, do you feel like you got any big-time criminals off the street in the course of this operation?
Well, if I can make a distinction with the premise of your question.
Please.
Okay, so in the U.S. Attorney's Office, there's various parts of the office. And for example, before becoming U.S. Attorney, I was the supervisor for the organized crime section. So here in New Mexico, the organized crime basically means going after drug trafficking organizations or cartels. So in that type of investigation, some of the tools that you're using is a wiretap. And when you're going after the organization, in those types of cases, the amount of drugs are large for the most part. And I think that's what you're talking about there, as opposed to in other parts of the office that may do other types of prosecutions. In this, for example, in looking at individuals who are creating that disproportionate amount of crime, some of the prosecutions there will look at are drugs involved, are is a person a felon in possession, having a prior conviction and being found with a weapon. In those types of cases, there's not necessarily large amounts of drugs found.
One of the biggest criticisms and the most vocal criticisms that we've heard about this operation was the highly disproportionate number of African Americans who were arrested. 28 out of the 103 defendants. That's 27% in a city with a 3% black population. What is your reaction to those numbers, and how do you explain those numbers?
I can't discuss the facts concerning this case, but let me tell you that in general, I take any type of allegations like this seriously. Now, what I can say, because this is public record, is as I've seen from your previous reporting, there was a motion filed on February 9th of this year concerning this matter, and President Trump forced my resignation on March 10th. If I was still U.S. Attorney, I would take this seriously. And if I may, prior to becoming U.S. Attorney, I was a supervisor of the organized crime section. And when allegations would be made concerning those types of cases, the types of cases I was supervising, I would take them seriously. And I can say that, and I'm not just talking about selective prosecution, but other issues. I would take them seriously, and in some instances, I actually, dismiss cases because of them.
I want to talk about the design of this operation. I've interviewed a number of legal and law enforcement experts who have said that the very design of this operation, bringing in informants from out of town, 3 of them African American, 2 of them Hispanic, no knowledge of the city, no knowledge of the crime that goes on here, and sort of dropping them into the middle of this neighborhood to go out and hunt for targets was bound to result in exactly what we saw here, a disproportionate number of black defendants and not a terrific number of the real sort of hardened criminals that you said you were after in the operation. I'm interested in what your role was in designing the operation. Did you just sort of take this as an off-the-shelf product from ATF, this EEI type operation, or did you actually sit in the room with the agents and draw up the X's and O's in terms of how the operation was going to unfold?
Well, again, because of my code of conduct and ethics, I can't answer that question. If I may, one of the things that was important during my tenure as U.S. Attorney was outreach to the community. Mm-hmm. And that was important in a couple places. And one of the areas was through the APD matter. And obviously we're here because there's concerns, and I'm really sad about this. For example, one of the issues that was brought up during the APD matter was race. Specifically, Dean Mathewson and Representative Mo Maestas wanted the investigation opened up again when APD was being looked at. You didn't have the statistics or the information there for that, but we included that in the settlement agreement. Another area that we worked on during my tenure as U.S. Attorney was when the African American ministers were afraid for some violence coming against their church. We went down to their church with the FBI, and we talked about how to make it safer there. We had outreach during my time period, and we tried to make a difference, and we tried to bring the community closer to law enforcement.
I have interviewed members of the African American community and leaders here in town who said they would have loved for there to have been some outreach in advance of this operation that targeted a neighborhood that is more densely populated with black people than any other place in the city of Albuquerque. They said they could have been useful and helpful to law enforcement in helping them discover some actual real criminals, rather than people who were living in their cars and struggling with drug addiction. Are they wrong to say that there was no outreach in advance of this operation?
Well, the U.S. Attorney's Office had been doing outreach in different areas. For example, with the heroin opioid epidemic that we're going through, we've been doing outreach to all the various communities.
Did you do any outreach related to this operation in advance of it taking place?
When you have an investigation, you can't go and you can't have a meeting and talk about the investigation that you're potentially about to do, because that's going to alert the community, and in turn that could alert whoever you're going to be looking at in the investigation. So I'm just saying in general, that's something that you don't do when you're about to do an investigation, because that'll jeopardize the investigation, and that could potentially jeopardize individuals, the safety and security of those individuals involved in that investigation.
Okay. You are running for Congress in the Democratic primary for the 1st Congressional District. One of your opponents in that primary, City Councilor Pat Davis, has introduced a resolution at the City Council for congressional investigations of this ATF sting, and to have the City of Albuquerque say to that agency, thanks but no thanks, in terms of operations like this in the future. I want to get your reaction to that resolution.
Well, right now, in front of Judge Parker, he's examining the facts that you have been reporting on, and that is the most appropriate place for for consideration of the issue that we're talking about.
So you don't have a reaction to Councilor Davis's resolution, your opponent in the primary?
Well, right now, like I said, the district court is examining the facts, and that's the right forum for it to be examined in.
Do you support a congressional investigation of the sting?
Like I said, the district court is the best place to examine the facts of the matter.
And that may well be an answer to some question. It's not an answer to the question I just asked you, though. Do you support a congressional investigation of the sting operation?
Right now, it is being considered by the court, and the court is considering the facts.